Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's training. People are still coming in, so we're just going to stay on this title slide for a minute here. You are at the Understanding Custodial Trauma training for the San Mateo COC. Okay, looks like it's slowed down for a second. Next slide, please, Sarah. Just some housekeeping functions. I believe live transcript is on. Let us know by chatting Sarah or myself, Vanessa, if you need the transcript and you can't see it. This is going to be a very interactive and practical application training. So we encourage everybody to chat, use the Zoom chat to talk to all of us. Next slide, please, Sarah. So as you may know, we are Homebase. We are a technical assistance provider working on building community capacity to end homelessness and reduce poverty. And then in particular, the Criminal Legal System Initiative, the CLSI, of which Sarah and I are a part, is sort of a department within Homebase. And we try to improve outcomes for people impacted by the criminal legal system. We do things like this training, we do action labs. If you check out our website, we'll have that link at the end. We have a lot of briefings that are relative to folks that are impacted by the criminal legal system. And we have a quarterly newsletter where we issue lots of information about upcoming webinars and that type of thing. And we'll share that with you at the end. Next slide, please, Sarah. So today's team for your training consists of myself. Again, my name is Vanessa Spinazzola. I'm the Criminal Legal System Initiative Strategy Lead, and I'm a directing attorney at Homebase. And I'm going to have everybody introduce themselves. I'll turn it to you, Sarah, next.
Thanks, Vanessa. Yes, my name is Sarah Ahmed. I'm a staff attorney at Homebase. I am part of the CLSI team, and I'm also part of the team that supports the work that is being done in San Mateo. So excited to be here, and I'm glad that you all could join today. I will pass it on to Rachel.
My name is Rachel Day. I work with the Lived Experience Advisory Group here in San Mateo County, and I also work with NAMI San Mateo with their crisis intervention training the police. And I've got a little bit of incarceration experience between me and my family. Between my immediate family, we've done over 121 years in jail, and I still have family members who have 50 years plus years left to serve. So I try to use that to help other people understand the impact that that has on their lives and everybody else, the entire community as a whole. And I'll give it over to Ivy.
Hello, I'm Ivy, and I am also a member of the Lived Experience Advisory Group to give back to the community after being brought up in a good community, a good home as a kid, and being a military spouse. But I did fall into homelessness for 8 to 10 years, and during that time, I was incarcerated 17 times in 4 years. But I've been housed the last 18 months, and yeah, so I've been able to be some part of some committees that hopefully will make that waiting process and getting housed a little bit easier.
Thank you both, Rachel and Ivy, for being here. And if you were in our last training, you know that Rachel and Ivy also assisted with the last CLSI training that we did for San Mateo. So happy to have you all back and assist with the training today. Next slide, please. We would like to know who is here today. So we're going to give you all a minute. If you could put in the chat your name, if you have an organization that you're affiliated with, and icebreaker, what's the most significant movie you saw last year and why was it significant to you? And we're still letting people in, so we'll give you all, I may have to repost that, but give you all half a minute. Welcome to anyone who just joined. We're doing introductions. You can put your name and your title in the chat. And if you want a movie. Got to vote for the Yellow Jacket series. Yes, we can expand to series if you would like. I'll share mine because I recommend it to everybody. Reservation Dogs on Hulu right now. So good. It's about this group of teens on a reservation in Oklahoma. It's just so good. Highly recommend. Movies ain't like they used to be. Isn't that the truth? Okay, good. We got some case managers, client services director, safe parking program. Awesome. Analyst. Okay, we'll keep on introducing yourselves so we can see who else is here. Program manager. Great. We're going to move along to the next slide, please, Sarah. So our objectives for today are to revisit and build upon the learnings from last month's criminal legal system training, increase your understanding of implicit bias in carceral institutions, which just means prisons and jails, better understand the unique stressors and trauma inherent in experience of incarceration, and learn about and practice strategies to better serve formerly incarcerated people. Next slide, please, Sarah. So we have some community guidelines. We just ask that folks stay on mute unless they're speaking, be as present as you can. We would love you to participate in the chats and hypotheticals. The whole second hour of this is actually hypotheticals and a panel and talking through how you would apply some of these strategies. If folks are sharing confidential information, we don't want to share that outside of this room. Take breaks as you need them. Today's content might be a little difficult. We're talking about trauma and we're talking about incarceration. Listen, if you can have your camera on, that's great. We'd love to see you. We highly encourage questions. If you don't understand a word that we say or what something means, please do ask about it. And if you have any other suggestions, please put them in the chat, or you can chat any of us individually as well. So with that, let's get started with our first section. Next slide, please, Sarah. We will be talking about implicit bias. As you all know, this is a 6-part, I believe, training series for the San Mateo COC, focusing on different aspects of implicit bias. And again, this last one that we did and today's both have to do with bias in the criminal legal system. So next slide, please, Sarah. Can folks raise their hands, either virtually or physically, if you attended last month's training? I just kind of want to see like how much of this is going to be repeat for folks. We got one raised hand. Okay, we might have a lot of new people. Okay, no, we have a couple. All right, well, I'll just go over this really quick. So Sarah and Ivy and Rachel did last month's training. We talked about how people with criminal records face unique housing challenges, and that BIPOC in San Mateo are arrested, sentenced, and incarcerated at a higher rate than white people in the same county, despite national studies that show similar rates of things like drug use and the position of their cases. And what that means is like a similarly situated Black person and white person may have been accused or convicted of the same thing, but that Black person may get a longer sentence, even though all the kind of facts are similar. Homelessness and incarceration are cyclical. As a housing provider with voluntary permission of your client, reviewing criminal records can tell you about what services might be helpful, but they can't tell you whether someone will be a good tenant or whether they're, quote unquote, dangerous or trustworthy. And collaboratively developing a targeted plan with your clients, including minimizing barriers through some things like record clearing, can be a successful method to secure housing. And we're going to talk a little bit more about targeted plans today as well. Do folks have any questions about last month's content as summarized in that slide? Or did anyone have any takeaways, or did they get to implement anything that they did last month? Okay, next slide, please. So I am not going to define all these words, but I'm just going to give you all a minute to look at these. And if folks don't know what any of these words mean, we are happy to discuss them with you. We are going to talk about community supervision on the next slide, if folks don't have specific questions about this slide. Okay. So the criminal legal system means both people incarcerated, but it also means the vast majority of people who are actually in outside on probation or parole. And that's really important for what we talk about today, because you are still under supervision by a parole or a probation officer. And if you violate one of the rules, they're called conditions for your parole or your probation, you can get what's called revoked. And that means that you will go back, or maybe for the first time, if you're on probation, to jail or prison. And so this is going to come up a lot when we talk today, because the fear of revocation is something that might be a primary guide for someone's decision-making processes, right? Because they may not want to go back to jail or prison. So it's just important to keep in mind that you may have someone come into your office and they may not disclose to you that they're on probation or parole, but that doesn't mean that they're not directly experiencing some sort of carceral control, we call it. All right, next slide, please. So in terms of implicit bias, these first 2 points were talked about during the last training. It's kind of the automatic and a lot of times unconscious association people make between groups of people and stereotypes. And it can play a role at every stage of the criminal legal system process, from the first encounter a suspect has with the police all the way through criminal sentencing. So when we think about the front end of the system, we have the police officer that decides whether or not to arrest somebody. We have a judge who decides whether or not somebody gets bail. We have a district attorney who decides what they're going to charge that person with and how many different types of charges they're going to make. We have a public defender who's defending that person, who may have their own assumptions about what their client is or who they are or how likely they are to have done something. A lot of criminal trials are just what's called bench trials. So you still have the judge, but then if you have a trial by jury, you have 6 to 12 people from the community that are then bringing all their own biases into decisions about what goes for this particular defendant. There's also studies that show that when it's a Black defendant and a white victim, the sentencing tends to be much harsher than when it's a Black defendant and a Black victim. So there's all sorts of there's all these different levels where implicit bias just kind of like piles on, and it's like a funnel where we end up with that, discrimination against BIPOC people, just because it's a contribution of all these different people making decisions. So we wanted to ask you, for what we're talking about today, which is more the back end. It's more like when someone has served time, or they're currently serving time, or they're out on probation or parole afterward. Who are the people making decisions about prisoners or people on supervision? Do any of you all know what the names of those folks are? Or who might be responsible for the welfare of people incarcerated or out on parole or probation?
We're looking to see how talkative a group we have.
They're not too talkative today. It's okay. You can say it. It's probation and parole.
Yes, we do have a response. Correctional officers, warden, parole boards. Good. And probation and parole.
Exactly. I
Exactly.
was even thinking outside the box to this question, like, because I've sat in medical Uber car rides, and like I've had people tell me, well, don't you think it's better for people to dry out in jail and just like have that be their rehab to get like clean and dry out if they're like on the street and need to get recovery? And I'm just like, wow, as a voter, like that's just not quite the way to force it upon somebody. But so there's voters and or like even landlords would be people that would make stereotypical decisions of people that are coming out of jail.
Sure. So what are some ways that implicit bias could show up in incarceration and supervision? Can anyone think? So we have some correctional officers, warden, parole boards, parole officers, judges. I gave an example earlier when it came to sentencing, but in terms of folks that may be out and on supervision and or currently incarcerated, what are ways that implicit bias might show up, you think? Okay, next slide. We'll give you 2 examples. The first one is solitary confinement. This is called many different things. Segregation, protective custody. There's all segregated housing units, whatever it may be. A lot of people that experience it call it solitary confinement. So this is when someone breaks some sort of rule or makes some sort of infraction while in custody, and they get sent to solitary, presumably to think things over. And as you can see in this chart, this is a study that was done of Black men. They are sent to solitary at a higher rate than white men in prison. And so this is that sort of funnel that we talked about. When you see that a higher portion of Black men are already being incarcerated, then on top of that, they're already experiencing solitary confinement. You have a more likelihood of someone coming out of prison that is a Black man in this instance with this data that would have experienced solitary. And we're going to talk a little bit about solitary today, and what that can do to people. It could be an entire, at least a 4-hour training to talk about the effects of solitary confinement. I will say just briefly, it affects different people very differently. Some people, 24 hours, they're done. Other people can, quote unquote, handle it for like a year. But we'll talk about that in a little bit more. And then the other key thing to know for today is revocations, which I talked about a moment ago. This is another study where it was basically found that Black probationers in this it's a multi-city study, 4 cities, none of which were in California, were revoked at a higher rate than white and Hispanic probationers. So again, this sometimes has to do with just a lot of times the interaction between whoever is making that decision. It may be the probation officer who is reporting some sort of violation. Sometimes, depending on the court setup, it could be just the judge. I've been in what they call reentry courts somehow, and like everybody who's on probation has to show up and say kind of what they've been doing. The judge may make a decision right there about whether to revoke somebody, regardless of what the defense attorney or even the probation officer wants to do. So again, this is where those implicit bias decisions may come in that result in something like what was found in this study. And this may be something that drives fear around the decisions you make in achieving housing in your reentry. Okay, next slide, please. So we are going to talk generally about trauma and in incarceration. How many folks have been to some sort of training before on trauma? If you could virtually raise your hand. Okay, great. A few people. Okay, awesome. Well, I'm just briefly going to touch on it today. I'm not going to give a full training just on general trauma response. So adverse childhood experiences. These are traumatic events in childhood, like abuse and neglect, witnessing violence, or having a family member attempt or die by suicide. So people refer to those as ACEs, if you hear folks say that. It can also be environmental factors that undermine a sense of safety, like substance use, parental separation, family members who are missing in prison or jail, food instability, or of course, experiencing homelessness. And then behavioral and chronic physical conditions, psychological trauma, like I mentioned earlier, sometimes it can come from just one incident. And for some people that could cause them a lot of trauma, depending on the incident and depending on the person. Trauma manifests both behaviorally and physically for some people, or both. It's not always necessarily a behavioral or a mental experience. Response to trauma is personal, like I mentioned. It depends on whether someone has access to a support system, how many prior traumatic experiences they've had, and then just this kind of general sense of, they call it resiliency, like who you are as a person. And there's also the whole nature versus nurture argument about that. The 4 ways that we say that folks can respond to trauma is fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. Folks have probably heard that before. People hear fight or flight a lot, but freeze is obviously like a deer caught in the headlights when it's just so much trauma and you stay where you are. Fawn is when you try to abate or mitigate the person who may be trying to cause you trauma, to try to please them, to try to get out of the situation and make it less traumatic for you. And then, of course, this impacts effective engagement with services. A lot of times we hear people say people are, quote unquote, service resistant. But that just may be some sort of trauma response that they are employing in order to engage with what is happening to them right now in any particular given moment. I do want to note, thank you for Georgia for putting this in the chat about solitary can absolutely cause schizophrenia. There are studies that show that, and you don't have to be schizophrenic to call out inequities. That's for sure. All right, if we could go to the next slide, please. We are going to show you all a short video. This is from the Compassion Prison Project in California.
It's time now, everyone. We're gonna do the Compassion Trauma Circle. Is everyone ready to face their past with compassion? Is that a yes? While you were growing up, during your first 18 years of life, if a parent or other adult in the household often or very often would swear at you, insult you, put you down, or humiliate you, step inside the circle. If a parent or other adult in the household often or very often pushed, grabbed, slapped, or threw something at you, step inside the circle. If a parent or other adult in the household often or very often ever hit you so hard that you had marks or were injured, step inside the circle. If you often felt that no one in your family loved you or thought you were important or special, step inside the circle. If your family lived in extreme poverty, step inside the circle. Step inside the circle. Step inside the circle. Step inside the circle.
There is no shame. There is no shame. There is no shame.
I'm so good. Good to see you. How are you? Amen. Noel, good to see you. Welcome. I was abused as a young girl. I was beaten by my mother. I was verbally abused by my mother. I was sexually abused by another man. My father was an alcoholic. My mother was a rageaholic. I've driven drunk. I've sold drugs. I was a juvenile delinquent. Probably my story is similar to most of your stories in here. I'm white and I'm female and nothing happened to me. So, I got a get out of jail free card. And so I'm here now because I see myself in every one of you.
I'm a traumatized child, raised by a traumatized child. My mother was traumatized as well as her parents.
Like he said, we wasn't born in the world of being evil people. My mother didn't want me. She hid her pregnancy. She tried to flush me down the toilet. But as I learned about these things, I always asked myself what was wrong with me.
When I come to the circle and I see everybody else and she's reading off the questions and people stepping in further, and I look at my childhood and I'm like, a lot of these people in this yard are just like me.
There was one step I should have taken that I didn't take, and I saw some of my brothers and my friends take that step, and I felt like such a coward. You know, I wasn't brave enough to be there with them when they took that step. And every round after that, I took the most difficult step.
Our traumas kept us separated. We were all on the circumference, all standing apart. But once we began to acknowledge our traumas publicly, it brought us all closer together.
In prison, you're not supposed to show your weaknesses in prison, though. But to want to do that, to walk in that circle like that, and to take each step forward was a reminder to ourselves that we still have a humanity and we worthy to be loved, though. Most people on the outside don't understand that we want to change so we can re-enter society better than what we left it.
And I think one of the things that when you was yelling that no shame and you had us yelling it out, it was freeing us too. And it was a point to where when I was looking at that and we was all looking at it in a circle, you can hear that echo, no shame. And that was very powerful, especially coming from a little lady like you.
I'm 76 years old. I've seen a lot. I don't like talking. I like to meet people that understand what's happening without words, and you one of them. Today has been one of the best days I had in my whole entire life since I've been locked up these 40 years.
Your true spirits are not violent. Your true spirits are magnificent.
Hi, my name is Fritzi
Thanks,
Corson,
Sarah.
founder of the
All right. Any initial takeaways from the video before we move on to our panel discussion? All right, let's roll on to the next slide, please. All right, so custodial trauma, some unique stressors. I'll just go through these real quick, and then we'll start asking Rachel and Ivy some questions. So of course, trauma comes in many ways. Again, we're here today just to talk about what may be unique to people experiencing incarceration. So there's a witnessing and experience of violence in prison, extended exposure to threats to safety, family friction, loss, and reunification, particularly if you're incarcerated for a long period of time, lost time in custody, which we're going to define and talk about a little bit in a minute, loss of autonomy and privacy. This often continues afterward if people are on community supervision. Fears around repeating the cycle. That's the cycle that I referred to earlier, having to do with revocation if you're on community supervision. And then physical impacts. Like I mentioned before, trauma can manifest physically, and it can come also from the quality of the meals that are served while incarcerated, the quality of the healthcare and medical care, and then again, as we mentioned, solitary confinement, which we can talk about now. So Ivy and Rachel are going to help us. They may talk from their personal experience and they may talk from what they have also witnessed with other people. They're not going to say names, but they'll just kind of generally maybe say what they have witnessed. So the first question to both of you is, how have you seen hypervigilance or any of these other stressors show up in yourself or other formerly incarcerated people? And then why does something like that matter when people are seeking housing and reentry?
I think it comes into play big time when you're talking about somebody coming off the street into like a shelter situation. Like, it's too institutional. It feels too much like jail. It feels too much like your freedom and your autonomy is being taken again. And there's also the whole, like, the interacting with other people at the shelter turning into violence, just like it does in jail. And I've seen a lot of people not want to go into a shelter for that reason. I didn't. I stayed on the street until I got housing mainly for that reason. I couldn't do the curfew and my dogs, but that was before the navigation center was built. So I won't comment on that now. I think it's beautiful over there, guys. But that was a big thing for me though. What about you, Ivy? You're muted, honey.
Yeah, you're on mute, Ivy.
This is a big question because I had never been in jail until I was like 37, and to be honest with you, like I didn't know that like going in jail, like I would get caught up with all the cases that had been waiting for me to be incarcerated, and I got slammed with 7 cases the first time I saw the judge, that because they had just been waiting for me to get there. But when I got released, I thought I was going home after that morning court date, and really, you don't get released until 10 o'clock at night. And I threw a tantrum by the time the sun was going down because I knew I wasn't going to be able to set up my tent and with any sunlight. And so that was scary for me to be released after 10 o'clock. But I know in talking with other people, you know, you just end up having this look over your shoulder reaction to any kind of movement or interactions with people that just could end up being sketchy or fight initiated, that you just have to be careful for. And I too chose to spend more time on the streets than in shelters because I didn't want to have to report to people. To be honest with you, like I wanted to be able to declare what I wanted to do during the course of the day and the night, and I felt safer within the family that was on the street than I did with the congregate living.
Yeah, anything that feels like an institution and feels like jail is really hard to not want to buck against after you've been in jail.
Yeah, thank you both for that. Thank you for sharing that. Okay, the next question, I'm going to start with Rachel on this one. I've mentioned this a couple times, but the question is, why is there fear around the cycle of incarceration? Whether someone is on probation or parole, or maybe if they're not, maybe if they're just living on shelter.
Because at any given moment, if you're on probation or parole, you know your freedom can be taken. Any given moment, your PO can come in and say, I don't like who's in your living room, and violate you. And they don't have to have a warrant to search your house. They can just come right in. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a new charge or even a dirty urine. I've been violated so many times over a missed appointment, even when I've called the PO, like I can't get to you 75 miles away. So it's this constant terror that if anything happens, like if you got a bunch of friends over having a picnic and 2 of them get drunk and get in a fight and the cops show up, well, that could violate my parole. I could go back to prison. A car accident could send you back to prison. You know what I mean? Anything. And it doesn't have to be your fault. And that constant looking over your shoulder really, really weighs on you. And sometimes it's not even you're looking over your shoulder for you. Like I grew up in a household where my dad was on parole or probation. Honestly, he just got off parole like 5 years ago. The man's like 70 years old. He's done. He's got his license back. He's proud of that. I'm proud of him too. I've been off parole now for, it's almost been a decade now. Actually, it's almost been a decade. But that period of 9 years was terrifying all the time. And I wouldn't live anywhere near the county that wanted me. Like I wouldn't live anywhere near Lancaster, Pennsylvania, because that was where I was on parole. It was ridiculous. It changes who you are. It really does.
Yeah, I was only on probation, but that 3 years kept restarting and restarting all those 17 times I was in jail over a 4-year period. And I being on a bike, I was immediately a U-turn magnet for cops to search and seize because they could while I was on probation. So I constantly like turned it into a game of putting containers and pockets of unlimited quantities on my person and in my bike trailer, so that it became a game of entertainment for me to watch them search and seize unlimited containers and pockets, for them to find nothing that they were looking for towards the end of the once I finally outsmarted them. But it just was exhausting to be U-turned on every time they spotted me.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. The other thing I had meant to bring up earlier and I didn't was association conditions, which I don't know if folks on this call are familiar with that term, but it is sometimes what is implemented on these conditions of probation or parole that Rachel and Ivy have been talking about, which prohibits you from associating with known felons or even potentially broader than that, anyone with an arrest record. It kind of depends. So like Rachel was saying in her experience, I mean, her family, like what if her family was the only place where she could go back to, and there were these association conditions? The thing is they kind of hang over people's heads because while they may be the law or they may be in your conditions, a lot of times people just kind of ignore them and then they live with this sense of fear and surveillance. And it's just kind of something that you know that your PO could call you on, but you really have no other choice. So I don't know, Ivy and Rachel, if you had association conditions or if that entered your experience at all.
I haven't, but my family has. Our 2002 family reunion, the Cecil County sheriff showed up because they knew my family was all going to be there, and they took 6 of my uncles to jail that day because they just played their odds. They're like, we know somebody's wanted. So yeah, it's the association thing is really, really terrible. Like, and I mean, my dad and his uncles, they're bikers and they earned their stripes, and but it was still it was a low down dirty trick. But like I know, like I have a cousin who's going to come out of prison in about a year, and he has nowhere to go but here. I'm not a felon, but like I don't, it becomes, do you tell your felonious cousin that they have to live out on the street, or do you let them in your house? And it's your family, you know what I mean? More than likely, most times you're going to choose your family, whether it's the best thing for you or not.
Yeah.
Yeah, I found in San Francisco, they were a lot stricter in associating with each other. Like they wanted within 3 sentences of meeting each other to admit that you were on probation or parole so that they had a choice of whether or not they were going to continue to hang with you or disassociate with you. But like in San Mateo County, like people would just know whether or not you were on probation and reject you at their tent site. And because they didn't want any association with their tent getting raided or whatever.
Yeah, thank you for that. I was going to ask. Yeah, 'cause sometimes that can be, I think folks know that probation departments in California are county by county. And so the kind of culture and like unspoken rules that may happen in any given county depends on the leadership and supervisors and what's kind of communicated down to the POs. Okay, this next question, we're going to start with Ivy. Can you tell me what is meant by lost time?
Well, in regards to custody, I would know usually that once I was in for a 10 or 11-day turnaround, which just meant that I had to see the judge and be told that I was put on court calendar for another 10 days. And then I would get told to plead no contest to the worst of the cases, and they drop the others, and then I could get out that day unless it was a worse charge in the felony category or something. And I did like 63 days and 8 months at my last stint to get off probation. But that last time, you just know that life's going on without you. And for me, I knew that my tent site was going to be gone within those 10 days. I may have been lucky within those 10 days that some of my belongings wouldn't have gotten ransacked, but most likely, everything I would have to restart regardless of what time I was in, short or long.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Rachel, do you have anything you want to add on this one?
For me, lost time added up to like missing out on my kids' lives. Like I did a year, and in that year, so much in their lives changed. And when I came out, like they had to get to know me all over again, and I had to get to know them, and I'll never get that time back. And I did that year over one joint, and I still don't get it because now that, marijuana laws have changed, it blows my mind that I lost a year of my kid's life for something that's now illegal.
Yeah. Well, that actually leads into the next question. If you want to expand a little bit, can you tell me about how family is a unique stressor in the context of incarceration? You want to start with that one, Rachel?
Well, in all honesty, you're worried about your family the entire time you're in there. And it doesn't matter what kind of family you have. Like, even if you don't have family, even if you just have a dog or I don't know, a hermit crab, you're helpless because you watch things happen. Like, I have a friend who his mom died of an overdose while he was in jail, and he couldn't even go to her funeral. Like, I've had my dog died that I'd had for 14 years while I was locked up. I've seen tons of people lose people while they're in jail, and just you're helpless. And when you go in that there's nothing you can do. And even visitation becomes traumatic in itself. Like, I would never let my kids come to see me in jail. I didn't want them to see me like that. I really, really didn't. And I only let my mom come once because it was so traumatic for her. Like, she used to fall apart and she'd be upset for days. And now my 19-year-old daughter's in jail. And my mom and my grandmother have both gone to see her. And I see how traumatic it is for them. I've had video visits with her, and it's traumatic for me. Like, when that call ends, my hands are tied. And then when you come out, everything has to start over. Just like Ivy was saying with her tent and all of her stuff being gone, like, all of your relationships have to start over. And everybody that was on the outside, they kept living. Their lives have changed and gone on without you. And that's something that's really hard to accept. Like watching my youngest learn to ride a bike while I was in jail, like, that burnt me. That burnt me to the core. And it's stuff you never get back. And it's stuff you pass on. Like, I remember going to see my dad when I was like, one of my earliest memories of seeing him is like, I was like 5 or 6 and having to crawl up on the little circle metal stool and pick the phone up, and how bad it smelled in there, and like how awful it was. And the fact that they cut his hair off, and to see my dad, who I thought was the strongest guy in the world, be coward and beat down like that, and know somewhere in the back of my mind that it was going to be me on the other side of that glass one day. I've known that my whole life. Like, prison is kind of a rite of passage in my family, and not for any other reason but because we're poor. Poverty sentenced us to this, and I think our government needs to try something else. Just saying. But there's my spiel. I'll get off the soapbox now, guys.
No worries. Thank you, Rachel, for sharing all that. Ivy, do you have anything you want to add on family friction and reunification?
I stayed out there longer than I should have. 8 to 10 years is a long time to be floating around in the tents and shelters. But it was primarily because I thought I was a lost cause as a mom. And so those emotions, I just ended up getting more and more into my addiction to escape the emotions. And to be honest with you, not until about 1.5 years ago, right before I moved into my apartment, did I reunite with my youngest, who was 20 20 at the time. So he just turned 22 this last April, but I'm still waiting on my 25-year-old to come around because she's kind of testing the waters to see how stable my recovery is. Even though I'm coming up on 5 years, she knew me with 7 years prior. So that's hard, and it still hurts to have that separation, but that was a lot of the reason why I just floundered out there, because I thought I was disqualified from ever getting that opportunity to reunite with my kids.
Yeah, thank you both for sharing that. That's a lot to share. And congratulations on your almost anniversary too, Ivy.
Thanks.
Okay, let's move on to another question here. We have a few more minutes for the panel. Let's talk about loss of autonomy. And Ivy, I'm going to start with you on this. How does loss of autonomy cause a trauma response during and after incarceration?
Well, the example that I had previously discussed in some of our planning meetings was like I used a lot of comedy to cope, and so like I had come up with the middle of the night conversations with the mail person that would deliver our mail, because his last name was really close to Bernstein Bears. I think it was Bernstein or something. But he would read our mail to make sure that that it was not uh, against jail rules as far as content goes. But he would have conversations with me because I said, you know, I was a real authentic and transparent person, and he said he was too. But he would try and lecture me from my mom's point of view that I needed to get right according to her standards and rules. And it just was really I don't know the word for it, but it was intrusive, I guess, you know, to know that like all my junk was out there as far as our correspondence between my family members and I. And to be honest with you, roundabout in a weird way, as a paralegal, the recordings of the phone calls do come around because I am having to transcribe and summarize some no contact order phone jail calls uh, right now for an attorney as I'm interning as a paralegal for my graduation. So all that privacy does not exist within the jails, and we're told that, you know, within our like fine print welcome to jail paperwork and the recorded jail transcriptions that you have to listen to before the record before the actual phone call begins. So, you know, all that goes on, and I turned it into like trying to get my bad behavior rewarded with music and or colored chalk when I was in the acute stabilization unit. Like if I behaved for them, they would give me music or colored chalk to draw on my chalk from my cell walls. And that was only because I acted out in comical ways in order for them to like reward me with those kinds of responses.
Yeah, privileges. Yeah.
Yeah, I flipped the script on them kind of, you know, in the most comical ways to where I kind of had them wrapped around my finger.
Yeah. Rachel, do you have anything to add?
Just that like every bit of prison reminds you that you have no privacy and no autonomy from the fact that everybody's wearing the same blues.
Yeah.
Everybody's wearing the same Jackie Chan sneakers. You know, everybody in some prisons I know, like down south, they still cut your hair off. Like I
Yeah.
got pulled off a freight train in Georgia and I used to have dreadlocks. I had really long dreadlocks. And they gave me the choice of either cutting them off, like they would shave my head, or they gave me one of those little jail combs, the little black ones you used to get at school when it was picture day and they'd give you a little comb to comb your hair out.
Mhm.
That little comb, and left me in a holding cell for almost 2 days until I combed all the dreads out of my hair. No conditioner, no water.
No, you just get bar soap and a black comb to
Yep.
do your body and your hair.
And it was just really traumatizing. And I watched another gentleman who was getting taken to like the Georgia State prison who had really beautiful long dreadlocks. He's a black guy, and like they were down to his butt. They shaved his whole head off. That guy was in tears. I was crying for him too. And like the privacy thing, I get phone calls from my cousin, from my daughter, from my brother, and they remind you in the middle of the phone call that you're being recorded. Like twice in California, they tell you you have no privacy, and they're very, very but when they tell you to squat and cough, you know you have no privacy.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Final question for you both. And we've mentioned this a couple times already today, but would you say that people experience stressors the same or differently? And what has been your kind of observation, either for yourselves or for other people you've been incarcerated with?
Everybody's definitely different. Some people adapt to jail really well and they dive right into it. Like my cousin was made for jail. He's out there having a blast. Then there's some people who, like me, I hibernate in jail. You won't see me. I'm the one my eyes and my ears are open and my mouth is shut. There's some people who fall apart, like really, really fall apart and can't handle it. And there's really no way to predict who is who until those doors close. And I would say that when it manifests on the street, definitely manifests like some people come out with the rage. They're just madder than all you know what because they were put in a cage. Some people come out with the fear of like, how do I stay out of that? And I will do whatever I can to stay out of it. And then there's some people who it doesn't even seem to faze them, who that's part of life and they just go on to the next. I kind of envy those people, but I think that one of the things with housing that at least it stands out in my experience is like my family moved so much. And part of that was keeping my dad out of jail. If that meant we had to move from Maryland to Delaware or from Delaware to PA or from PA to New Jersey, to whatever state didn't want him at the time, that instability that gets passed down. And I really think that's probably one of the hardest, and like getting people to come back off the street after bouncing around, and then you go into jail and all your stuff is gone and your apartment's gone. Then you're on the street and it just keeps sending you down that spiral. I think that's what I would pass on most.
Yeah. Ivy, what do you think? How do stressors show up differently for folks in your experience?
I think it shows up completely different based on how people get parented. I remember one story I shared was this girl got bailed out and was back that same night, and she had purple hair and like was, you know, you could tell she was spoiled as hell, but she got pretzeled, like literally her body was like crammed into her jail cell and with 5 or 6 officers like contorting her body, and she was screaming, and I just in a very like not compassionate way saying Princess Purple Rain to her purple tears. It reworded it because she was wailing and you know, she couldn't believe she was back in jail, but like she just thought she was on top, invincible. And you know, some people need to be, you know, reconstructed and reprogrammed to realize that they can't be, or that they're not above the law, you know, and that's what she felt like she was. And unfortunately, I was a bit of a bully in administrative segregation or isolation at that point, you know, because I was just like, look at this bitch, you know. You know, for her to get bailed out and come back and think that she still like was able to tell the officers what for when she was being manhandled in such a way. But the other people would be able to team up and back each other up and then gang up on an officer. You know, they had some cojones to be able to think that they could try and put an officer in a cell and them get out of the cell. But of course, they made it over to administrative segregation for doing something so stupid. But the amount of reasons that people ended up in segregation were various, you know, from their charges of flushing a baby down the toilet, and so they were put in protected custody, to just doing stupid things while they were in general population. It's all, I think, just various ways of how they were raised and how they interact with society and what they think they can pull off while they're incarcerated, based on what social interactions they've had. And when they get out of jail, they try it again.
Yeah, and again, it depends on who the person making the decision and how race might play into that too.
Yeah, definitely race plays into it. You know, there was definitely an off-kilter representation in administrative segregation as far as BIPOC being the highest representation.
I think one of the things I found that really does manifest across the board in everybody who's done, especially long amounts of time in prison, you don't want to be around other people. Like everybody I know who's come out after a long spell, you know, like 5, 10, 15 years, they don't want to live in communal settings. They don't really want to live close to their neighbors. They all seem to want to like be out away from the world. And I guess that comes from being forced to live among people and people you can't choose. I think that's something that, like, especially when you're trying to get people into housing and, you know, off the street, that's probably one of the things I notice the most is that they don't want to be around other people.
Yeah, we're gonna we're gonna watch a short video and then take a break and taking some initial questions. Then we're gonna talk more specifically about how stuff like that impacts housing. Sarah, can we go to the next slide and watch this video real quick? And in the meantime, if folks have questions, we're gonna move to practical applications. So now is the time to ask your questions about the system or anything we've talked about so far. Okay, go ahead, Sarah.
You know, looking back to your time behind bars, you mentioned trauma. What did you know? And the statistics are really depressing in terms of mental health prevalence for prisoners. What did you see there in terms of mental health with other inmates?
I mean, you literally see individuals, right, walking around, talking to themselves, walking. You know, someone is dealing with trauma because they don't take baths and they talking to themselves, and no one is trying to reach this individual. You have staff that's right there within the institution, and you got lives that are dying and walking around that one day they might walk outside these prison walls, and no one is helping these individuals while they're in there. You got inmates, well, excuse me, I don't say inmates, but you got human beings that are walking around there that are suffering from trauma, that are trying to kill themselves, that are taking drugs to escape where they're at the moment. And it's so heartening for people such as myself, who I thought didn't have or wasn't suffering from anything, you know, because, okay, I am taking a bath or a shower every day. I'm not talking to myself every day. I'm not using drugs while I'm incarcerated. I'm not trying to drink hooch while I'm incarcerated. So I'm thinking that I'm sane, but I'm only thinking that because of what I'm seeing around me every day, but not knowing that the human mind was not built for you to sit in a bathroom. Was what I call those cells, were a bathroom. The human mind wasn't built for you not to know when there is light outside. The human mind wasn't built for you not to be able to see your reflection by looking at yourself in the mirror. Because when you incarcerated, sometimes if you go to solitary confinement, they don't even have a mirror in there. They don't even have a window in there. So you don't even know who you are anymore. So you have to deal with all this compounded on the fact that they just gave me 600 months. Or my best friend that went to trial with me got a life sentence. Or my daughter is crying out to me, Daddy, when you coming home? Can you come home now? And I can't. Like, so, you know, trauma from incarceration and the justice system, no one is talking about it. And we're actually now in a position where people are being released. But released to what? So when they come home, we're looking at them like they're animals, but they've been caged like animals. No one has treated them as human beings. And then when they come home, they're still not treated as human beings.
And we have to, I think, as a society, acknowledge that, I mean, what you're describing, there's science to support that the human brain is going to be changed from that experience in really traumatic ways. And, you know, prisoners, human beings are going to leave prison at some point, and then we have to deal with that as a society.
Okay. All right, y'all. That's kind of a heavy first hour, so we're going to take a 5-minute break. Please get some water, hug your pets like Ivy just did, and we will see you at 5 past the hour. Okay, be right back. right, y'all, let's start coming back.
I'm here. I'm just brushing the knots out of my hair.
Ivy, are you back? Awesome. Okay, well, we are going to go into practical strategies and application. So we're going to go right into a panel discussion again. And as we alluded to previously, it's going to be a little more on like how this kind of works on the housing stuff on implementing. It's going to be about, yeah, so we're going to spend, I think, about 10-15 minutes on that. And then we have, I believe, 7 different hypothetical situations. We're going to spend about 20 minutes on those. The idea is so that you all, the participants, can practice your learning and give ideas. However, in the worst case scenario, Rachel and Ivy can also share how they would respond to the hypotheticals if they were in you all's positions. And then we're going to try to leave about 15 minutes toward the end to do a Q&A and also hopefully talk about some local resources that are particularly of value. And then we'll close out. So that's our next 55 minutes. So next slide, please, Sarah. So here are the practical strategies. And you are welcome to read the slide, but instead of me reading it to you, we are going to go through and ask Rachel and Ivy what they think that they mean. So we're going to start at the top. So when we say that a practical strategy is to establish a desired housing type, and you both have alluded to this before, what does that mean? What does established desired housing type mean?
I mean, if everybody works in housing, then it's kind of the initial question of like, what are you looking for and what are you not looking for? Do you want roommates? Do you not want roommates? Are you okay living with other people? Like, is there a certain neighborhood you don't want to be in? Like, I'm not really like familiar with like gang ties or anything like that, but I know like you don't want to be living where like, you know, a rival gang would be, or you don't want to be in certain areas. Getting to know your clients, their people.
Mm-hmm. Ivy, do you have any thoughts to add on that one?
I'm mute again. Sorry, I was on mute again. I know in our notes we had even some people have fear of stairs or have abilities that limit them to climb stairs. But in my housing search, when I finally sat down with Georgia, we were able to find a place really quick. I had initially wanted like an in-law unit so that I could have neighbors, but not have like a lot of neighbors. But then we got to talking that I was really looking for the outskirts of the county so that I wouldn't have quick commute capabilities to anybody in the tent encampments to come over and shower frequently. And so I was able to find that in Pacifica, even though it was an apartment and it wasn't an in-law unit, I was able to find a place rather quickly in within the time frame of my housing vouchers constraints. And you know, once that we finally sat down, Georgia was able to rattle off quite a few places that I was able to set up appointments with, instead of me hiking to all kinds of like individually owned in-law units that, you know, were kind of stigmatizing me having a voucher, even though I presented it with that portfolio presentation.
Yeah, we talked about that last time. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So the next one is to tailor check-ins, and it says it could be daily. So how would a case manager go about figuring out how to tailor check-ins with formerly incarcerated people?
I would say find out how they're comfortable communicating. Like if it's by text, then text them. If it's a call, or if it's they don't care either way, You know what I'm saying? But like, I think at least I have found that I respond better to people if they like you'll get through to me much faster by text than you will like say email, just because like I check my email once a day. I check my text messages like throughout the day, but also like find out what it is they need. I mean, like some people have a whole lot of stuff that they need before they can get into housing, whether it be ID or criminal background check, all that kind of stuff. Like you might need to check in with them every day. But like somebody who might not have quite a list of stuff to do before they can get into housing, maybe once a week or when something new comes up, like.
Yeah, can you talk a little bit about when we were preparing, we were talking about that notion of lost time and how that might interaction and also the loss of autonomy. So those two factors, how that might factor into like goal setting and how that might be different for formerly incarcerated.
Yeah, like some people come out of jail and it seems like they have a list of stuff they want to accomplish and they want to get their life right and they're on a mission and they're doing and doing and doing. And then there's some people who they've been sitting in that cage where nothing happens for a long, slow time. And to them, like they might take forever to get you a piece of paper. And it might not seem like it's a big deal. Like I think the people that are on that mission though, who have this whole huge list and they think they're going to be able to accomplish it right away, they're the ones I worry about the most. Because when they can't get everything done as fast as they want it, they start to fall apart. So just remind them, you've done this and this and this so far, you're doing good. Because it becomes very defeating when you have that huge list of stuff to check off before you can become a normal functioning human again.
Yeah, and actually, I think I'm not remember if it was Rachel or Ivy, but these 3 questions I thought were super handy. Things that you could ask people at your check-ins. What do you think you can handle a day? What do you want to ask me about tomorrow? What would stop you from attending a check-in? How are you going to get to our next check-in? Those are some tools that can
the what could go wrong scenario. Like no matter what the goal is, I ask myself this is what can go wrong? How can I screw this up? How on my worst day can I trip and fall on my face? And then how do I prevent that?
Mm-hmm.
And that strategy, I think, works with a lot of people of like, well, what's the worst that can happen? And how do we stop it before it happens?
Yeah, exactly. Ivy, do you have anything you want to add on the tailoring check-ins?
Yeah, I know most of the times I was coming out of jail, I was looking to go get high. Most of the times when I was in there for a long time, the 2 times that I was in there a long time, I should say, like I did have that list where I was like, dude, I am not doing this again. Like I have a lot of stuff that I need to get caught up on. And I was on a mission and I needed a lot of support to get it done. And I knew I didn't want to go backwards to what I had been living in. Whereas the 10-day turnarounds, like I was like, dude, let me just pick up where I left off, So you kind of want to gauge where a person's at as far as their seriousness, because there were times where I was weaselly with case managers because I was just looking to get out of the checklist thing and get back to my next high. And you got to write those ones off, because you're just going to be chasing somebody that's not looking to be serious about your time being of value, let alone their own checklist of stuff. But those folks that do want time, like it's hard to gauge whether or not you, for me, I like my independence, but sometimes I feel like I could be nagged a little bit too much to where or henpecked. And so sometimes I've had to ask people like, can you just check in with me once a week? Or some weeks I do need 2 or 3 times to be checked in on a week that's too full for me to do all on my own. and for me to be able to communicate that sometimes is the best that I can do, because I sometimes don't know how to juggle it all. And so sometimes you just asking them that, and for them to be able to convey that back and forth is the best communication that you can get between you and your client, coming out of their fog, because it is a different pace, from 3 a.m. breakfast and 10 a.m. lunch and 3 p.m. dinner, because their shifts and jail are 6 a.m. and 6 p.m. shift changes, and they could care less that you're just a number to them. And so when you're taking priority that your life matters again, it's different that there's somebody outside that actually cares to pitch in and help you become somebody other than a number.
Yeah. So this is kind of related, but this reentry stabilization plan, we're recommending here to jointly draft a reentry stabilization plan. Can either or both of you talk a little bit more about what the components that folks should about when
An
they're
ID, a cell phone, a social security card, a resume, potentially a job. But while you're looking for a job, putting together some sort of rental portfolio so that you can have, something to petition the landlord about, and piece together, that rental portfolio with your record, some character references, get some volunteer positions, do some things that are gonna make them feel like they're contributing to society, whether it be 12-step meetings, things that are gonna keep them out of trouble.
Yeah. Do you want to add to that, Rachel?
Yeah, I would say the first thing you should do is ask them what they're going to do the day they get out. Because the day you get out usually defines how you're going to go about things. Who are they going to go see? Because you've been sitting in that jail cell for a long time. You've been thinking of a human being, or maybe more than one human being. But find out who they're going to see day one and make sure that's a good influence.
Yeah,
If
if
they're
it's
going
a
to see the
family
homies
member
with-
or a girlfriend, great. But if it's a connect, flush them.
And if it is a connect, if it is something that's detrimental and you can't talk them out of that, at least support them with harm reduction. Straight up, and give them the reality. All right, go hang out with the homies and get high. You better take this Narcan with you because you're going to need it. The relapse will get you. You know what I mean?
The fentanyl is serious nowadays. Warn them, that Narcan is serious because fentanyl's out there and everything now.
But I would say just be real with them and find out what they want and balance what they want and where they're at with what you think they need to do. You know what I'm saying? I know we all have the list that Ivy just did, and that's the list I had when I came out too, but not everybody's got that list. Some people don't, they have I want to get an ID so I can go to the bar. You know what I mean? So you kind of got to gauge where that person's at and meet them where they're at.
Oh, I forgot, the ID and the food stamps get you the phone.
Yeah. Another thing, I'll just make a plug for finding out if someone does have a probation or parole officer and maybe what their conditions are, so that you can be aware of them as a case manager in terms of where they may be able to find housing. The other thing too, if the ID is a driver's license, and again, we've talked about family issues, sometimes folks who have been incarcerated for a long time, their significant other has divorced them, there's been custody issues, maybe child sought emancipation, there may be back child support offered that the owed, there could be holds on their driver's license. A lot of folks in prison come from over-policed communities, and so they have a lot of traffic tickets for things that I would not get driving around, lots of traffic tickets. Yeah, fines, fees, and costs. So folks seeking housing have a lot on their plate, but there's a study that was done that said formerly incarcerated people on average face 5 significant legal issues as they're coming out of incarceration. And so they have court dates, they have appointments. So they really do, it's like a full-time job being formerly incarcerated, at least for a while. So I just
And it
wanted
costs money. It's a huge,
Mhm.
like probation is not cheap. Like California, I can't really speak for, I've never been on probation here, but Pennsylvania charged me for my monthly supervision fee. They charged me for the urine test they made me take every month. They charged the fines and fees from the courts. They charged me to be in Lancaster County Prison. That was a $4,000 bill. And it just added up and added up and added up. And it became like, do I pay rent or do I pay to stay out of jail? And that became like a huge source of housing instability. Because when it comes to, do I pay to stay out of jail or do I pay anything else? You're going to pay to stay out of jail first.
Yeah, definitely. Well, we only have a few minutes more for this slide. So of the ones that we haven't discussed yet, Rachel and Ivy, maybe you can each take one. We have assist in overall goal setting. We have assess the role and support of family. We have support a person developing a narrative that doesn't re-traumatize them. And we have don't assume that the way people are acting is due to custodial trauma. Do you all have a closing thought you want to give on any one of those?
I'll speak for the family aspect of it, like, because family and friends can make or break somebody when they come out of jail. If they don't have a supportive environment to go back to, that's really, really hard. And I would say that encourage your clients to reach out to family that they've been cut off from if possible. You know what I mean? Because that really, the more people you have to say, yeah, you did a good job, the more likely you are to do it again. So support's a big thing.
Thanks for that. Ivy, do
I'm
you
not recommending my path, but financially, I ended up scoring really high on my financial credit score as a 720 because, as my attorney put it to me, you can't squeeze juice out of a turnip if, like, because I was like, how do I pay any of this? And he's like, well, if you don't have it, you don't have it. Just like you can't squeeze it out of a turnip. And so, because I was out on the street over 7 years, all my child support, all my traffic tickets, all my fines were off my record, and I had a 720 score. So that may be a way your client can go if they haven't touched stuff for as long as I was out there. But that is potentially what ended up happening for me when my attorney had put it to me flat as it was with, child support requesting me to even pay $5 out of my food stamp money, and I couldn't do that. And so without touching it, they just canceled and gave me back my driver's license and my credit score.
That's good.
Yeah.
All right. Next slide, please, Sarah. So just to sum up this piece before we go on the hypos, I mean, generally, if you walk away with anything, check in early and often, be sensitive and aware of family issues and physical safety issues, and then of course, check your own assumptions and biases. All right, next slide, please. Here's where we go, hypos. We would love you all to participate, either orally or in chat. But here is your hypo. Mike was released 2 months ago and had been staying on his brother's couch. The apartment was a 1-bedroom, and Mike's brother often had friends over, hanging out in the living room. Recently, Mike started shelter hopping. You, his case manager, found a shared living situation with roommates where you can cover rent for 6 months. Mike refuses to accept the subsidy. What's going on here, and what is your next step as a case manager?
Don't make me call on somebody. I will do it.
There's a lot of scenarios if anybody wants to throw one out that could be happening.
Yeah, Rachel or Ivy, do you want to get started with what might going on here and what the next step should be?
Ivy, do you want to take this one or do you want me to?
I could think of like a very similar situation here in my apartment. Mike's brother could be having company over that's not healthy and or safe in the apartment, and so Mike started shelter hopping so that he could get his life back on the road instead of having an uninterrupted partying going on in his brother's apartment. And so he wants to save up instead of put his money in a rental situation by staying in the shelter and saving up. But you wouldn't know without asking, as Keith said. You could totally ask him what's going on.
Yeah, my thought is he feels like if he goes to another roommate situation, he's going to end up losing his temper and end up back in jail. But once again, I agree with Ivy. You got to talk to him and find out what's going on. And if it is he doesn't want to be with roommates, well, then what are his other options? And it says he can cover rent for 6 months, but like, maybe we need to find a plan that lasts a little more than 6 months.
Great. Thanks for that, y'all. Yeah, we have another.
Keith is right. Like discuss the like previous experiences as well.
Mhm. Absolutely. Okay, great. Let's do hypo 2, Sarah. All right. Despite the odds, Wayne got sober during incarceration and wants to stay that way. You have found him a spot that will be 100% covered by subsidies at a sober living facility. The facility has a daily 7 p.m. curfew, permits visitors only twice a week, doesn't have locks on the bedrooms, and has surveillance cameras in all the halls and common rooms. Most local facilities are the same. Wayne doesn't want to take the spot. What do you discuss with Wayne as his options? Ivy, you want to start on this one?
Locks, cameras, jail is reminding me of, like not having locks, or because I don't know, like it sounds a little bit like shelters and jails, a little bit.
I'd remind Wayne that his options are he could sleep on the street until he gets his housing voucher, or he can deal with the shelter. Because those are really, honestly, those are the choices. So which one is what he wants to do? I don't think Wayne's going to stay too sober on the street. He'd be better off in the sober living facility. But
asking him what's spooking him. But I know for me, like the paranoia of a lot of those things that don't allow safety to feel like it's available in that setup.
What about assessing his family options?
It's not even mentioned in there. No.
Yeah, it's no other options got mentioned. But honestly, like I feel like if family was an option, he would have brought that up before the sober living. In all honesty, usually people who have family to go home to don't think about the sober living facility deal.
Yeah. I mean, other options is you could draft a reentry stabilization plan that includes a lot of meetings. We were just talking about previously, Medi-Cal will cover some of your transpo. If this rises to the level that he absolutely cannot handle the trauma that the situation induces, but he wants to stay sober and he doesn't have family, like where can he stay? And what does he have control over that he can do, and that you can bring other resources to the table to help him try to stay sober if that's his goal.
Definitely get him involved in like the recovery community. Like here would be like Heart and Soul and
12-step meetings. You'd be surprised how many people open their doors to have people rent rooms within their own homes or their own SLEs that they manage.
Yeah. That's great. Those are good tips. Okay. Sarah, let's go to hypo 3, please.
I'm putting a 15-second timer on for you guys to respond on this one.
Okay, we're going to stay silent for 15 seconds. Okay, we're going to rely on you for that. All right. Practical application hypo 3. The local public housing authority has not only enacted low barrier policies for people with criminal records, but established a homeless preference. enabling Julie to be called upon from the wait list. Julie receives her housing choice voucher, and is excited to get her own place, but is extremely concerned about rejection from private landlords when they learn about her prior incarceration. Is it possible to assist Julie to overcome this barrier and tell her story without re-traumatization? And if so, how? Okay, timer go, Ivy.
This is a good one for those that are working in the shelter, putting people on the voucher list.
I can't wait to answer this one if nobody does. Nobody. What's that timer at? I'm going to answer. I'm going to do it.
Go.
All right. The easiest way to overcome this, there's a landlord tenant bonus that the county offers, and I'm pretty sure they still offer it. That, like, I convinced my first landlord to rent to me. I was like, well, they give you this big chunk of money and you get a big security deposit. And that was enough. That was literally enough. Throw some money at somebody and usually they're like, okay, all right, fine. And
Yeah.
it was pretty scary for me the first application that I filled out too, after not having a place for, over a decade. But I think the other thing is to make sure that the places that your clients are applying to are going to be more, I would say, more open to renting to somebody who's just coming off the street. Like, I'm not saying like send them to the ghetto, but like, I don't think the Hilton would have taken me right when I came off the street either. You know what I'm saying? But just let them, and that landlord tenant bonus is an awesome incentive.
Yeah, it raises a really good point. I mean, people don't have to try to fit into this societal definition of like what a remorseful or like a good formerly incarcerated person looks like if there's just a financial incentive. People don't have to be re-traumatized. There's other options where people don't have to tell their story 50 times and play to this stereotype.
Exactly.
And what's nice is the housing department has those flyers to announce and describe those bonuses on their website. So you can put those in the portfolio or the tenant portfolio that you're creating with character references and your rental resume and all that.
Yeah. The only other thing I'll mention is that it's kind of like what has already been said in the chat, is just to work with the client. Like, are there portions that she does feel comfortable talking about? And you don't have to necessarily be a counselor, but you should probably get some input when people are telling you traumatizing things as a case manager, and kind of helping people how to like tell their story. Okay. Hypo number 4, next slide, please, Sarah. So returning home after 10 years and with 5 years of parole, your client Leonard is elated to have found shared housing with some old friends from his neighborhood. Your organization has funds to cover his portion of the rent for 6 months, and Leonard feels confident he can save and take over rent after that. As you are finalizing the case management plan, he tells you that some of the other guys in the house are also on parole, but that you shouldn't worry about it. So you, case manager, should you worry? Why or why not? And what would you do, if anything?
So talkative, so talkative.
Go ahead, Rachel or Ivy. When do you want to start?
I'll let Ivy go this time. Either that or I'm calling.
You guys can find your mute buttons, can't you?
Wow. Well,
I'd worry because of the old friends. And so I would ask him to think about worst case scenario. If any of them broke the lease, how would he be able to carry the lease? Or if they got broke, if they had to go back in and for breaking their parole, or started using drugs, or got into, if they were gang related or whatever, if they just got into trouble, what would he do to if the housing like fell through? What would the worst case scenario be, and so that he could see whether or not it was worth all the consequences.
Yeah. Rachel, what are your thoughts?
I agree with the whole playing the tape forward. Like anytime I have somebody who's in a bad situation, that's why I tell them, what would happen if you did this? What's the worst that could happen? Like, let's play this through and see if that's a good idea. The other thing that I would worry about, like, is just the being on parole. On parole, what happens when the parole officer shows up? Like, I would ask my client, have you talked to your parole officer about this? If they sign off on it, I'll sign off on it. But if they don't, then I wouldn't either. You know what I mean? Because in the end, that's what's going to send your client back to jail.
Yeah.
Always got to worry about what's going to send you back to jail.
All right. Thank you. Okay. Next typo, please, Sarah, number 5. Okay. Jeff is a new case manager in your office, and as a seasoned provider, you are tasked with mentoring him. Sitting in on an intake, you observe that the interview is going well until Jeff learns that the potential client was convicted of armed robbery and served a 7-year sentence. Jeff looks visibly taken aback and asks the client if he's sorry about, quote, what he did, unquote, because, quote, you probably won't get housing unless you show remorse, end quote. What feedback do you provide to Jeff? Why and how?
I'd call Jeff a jerk.
I did a similar presentation at another conference and I used this typo and someone from the back row called out, I would fire Jeff. And I was like, okay, well, maybe if you wouldn't fire Jeff, what would you
I would
say?
ask Jeff what his issue was. This is why he thought he could talk to people like that. He'd have to take one of those courses on respect. But
Yeah,
I would tell him that that's just not the way to, that's not the way to interact with somebody. You don't know the circumstances of the case. You don't know who they are as a person. And it's not Jeff's job to judge. That would be all right.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, something that could be going on with Jeff is that a lot of people are victims of crime. I mean, maybe Jeff was a victim of an armed robbery. Maybe Jeff used to be a convenience store clerk and he was a subject of an armed robbery and he lost his job and all these other things happened. But yeah, I do agree with that. Rachel, Ivy, is there any other feedback that you would give to Jeff or anyone in the audience as well? Yeah, Ivy, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I was just giving somebody a chance to possibly respond.
Comment in the chat.
Yes.
The only one chiming in today.
Keith said, tell Jeff to ask open-ended questions. If remorse comes up, that could be used as a strength. I think that's a good idea. I know my dad used to be an interviewer and the person that had to fire with his executive director position. And he used to come home and tell a lot of hard stories that were interesting in those predicaments. And I see this as a redirect opportunity for the person sitting in on the intake to say, would you like to find out a little bit more about what's on his conviction record and his experience with his sentence instead of jumping to conclusions. So that he kind of gets checked a little bit and then the client is able to realize that he's got somebody in his corner a bit.
Yeah, that's a great point. Making sure the client feels comfortable. The other opportunity this presents is to talk about implicit bias in the criminal legal system. We don't know if Jeff is BIPOC in this scenario. We don't know if the case manager is BIPOC. We don't know if the mentor is BIPOC. There's 3 people in this room, so there's a lot more happening than it's just really on this slide, right? But we could also explain to people what we know, which is like, well, we know that BIPOC people are overrepresented in the criminal legal system. Not saying that the client in this case did or didn't do the thing, but the likelihood that they were arrested, convicted, and got a longer sentence is higher if someone is a person of color. So it's an opportunity for education on that could go just beyond even this one situation and helping this client. All right, hypo 6, next one, please, Sarah. Okay, you meet Janelle while doing inReach at the local jail. She admits to stealing her then teenage son's cash earned from mowing lawns to pay for drugs. Her son, Billy, now 23, forgives her, but still feels shame. She also stole from her parents, friends, and relatives prior to incarceration and now feels that she has nowhere to go. You cannot find any housing for her other than the emergency shelter when she's released on Friday. Do you suggest Janelle talk with Billy, her son, or relatives about housing, and why or why not?
I do. I'd always tell people that, like, you should talk to your family. If your family's healthy for you, but I would also definitely make sure she's got a plan B, like the emergency shelter.
I would actually be on the side of encouraging her to stand on her own 2 feet and let her family be in part of that conversation. But as she lets them know that she's going to the shelter, see if there's invitations that are open as backups. Kind of opposite a little bit, because I think it would instill more trust in her family to have them see that she's going to try and take a go at her own independence and not encroach on their property and or put them at risk of her old behavior.
Yeah, those are both great answers. They're both great options too. And the other thing, I mean, going back to the trauma point, I mean, different people are going to have different levels of resiliency to be able to stand on their own 2 feet too, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know for me, it's still a temptation. That was my biggest addiction, to stand under a camera and get away with not beeping going out the door. It was my biggest adrenaline rush out of all the different chemicals that I took. Like, I don't know why that one was the biggest rush.
Yeah. All right, last hypo. Next slide, please, Sarah. Number 7, Desmond has cycled in and out of jail for several years. He's currently on probation and living in temporary shared housing. He's called you, his case manager, a couple times over the past few weeks with increasing concern that his housemate is going to, quote unquote, report him to his probation officer. You haven't been able to figure out whether this housemate is truly threatening this or what he would be reporting Desmond about. What could be going on with Desmond in this situation, and what might be your next step as the case manager?
Truthfully, my first thought would be, is Desmond getting high again? And I would have to, I would be the one to just outright ask him, well, like, what's he going to report you for? Like, what are you doing that you think you need to worry about? And if you think he's just going to do it out of maliciousness, then what happened? Definitely need more details from him about what went on.
Yeah, there's definitely a jump to suspicion of paranoia in this write-up. But to gather more information as to what his story is and whether or not his house is his housemate or his neighbor, his housemate, whether his housemate collaborates with that story, if he happens to be around, or if his housemate has no biggie with him in passing while he's at home, like, to squash the whole thing. Like, maybe conflict resolution is a skill that could be put to use. You never know. But without knowing if there's mental health involved here or paranoia from drug use and or old trauma paranoia, like, it's hard to tell.
Maybe talk to the housemate on the side and see what you can get their side of it if possible. I definitely wouldn't talk to the probation officer.
No, we definitely wanted to convey that in this training is please
Yeah,
do not
don't.
ever call a criminal legal system actor without speaking to your client first.
Unless
And
you're
they tip
like
off
saving your
a
life.
reason that the probation officer does not need to stop by. And he would just raise suspicion of like, well, should I stop by?
All right, thanks y'all. We're going to move to the next slide, Q&A, which may be brief with this crowd.
All right.
So Q&A, first is what questions do you have for today's presenters? So feel free to put those in the chat or come off mute. And then also we're asking providers if you have any experience working with formerly incarcerated people, successes, strategies you want to share, whether they relate to things we talked about today or other strategies. And then we also wanted to get to resources, local resources, and I believe Ivy may have some of those to share. So the third point here is what partnerships and or resources have you found to be especially helpful when working with someone who is a survivor of custodial or reentry trauma? So if you want to start there, Ivy, perhaps we'll have some folks add in.
With the last question, you mean?
Yeah, the resources. You're going to talk about Navigation Center.
All I know from Navigation Center is that I am participant of the Every Other Sunday Hearts for Homeless group that meets with all the shelters. They zoom in from Safe Harbor and Navigation Center, but they've also given out tablets to those that are at Spring Street and some of the folks that are in rehabs like at Free at Last and whatnot, so that they can zoom in. And it's a kind of just an outreach to homeless. And there's even gals that do meditation from the Middle East. So they're all over the clock, time zones, participants that are volunteering and giving out gift cards for your first several attendants. The Hearts for Homeless is every other Sunday morning, 10 a.m. thing that has been helpful to get grounded and supported and centered. It's not churchy. I mean, it's supposed to be somewhat like positive and happy and not so much religious in any way, shape, or form. I don't even want to call it spiritual, but I mean, we do bring up different positive things that are going on and listen to TED Talks or videos that are inspirational. And we've even had tours of Jasper Farms therapy animals. Sometimes they've gone in person, but that's gone through the pandemic and is still continued to meet. The other things that I've been able to participate with, I'm recruiting for League, which is Lived Experience Advisory Group. You don't have to be homeless, but you can help homeless folks and be a part of it. As far as staffed positions, they meet once a month. It's they meet sometimes Tuesdays and once every other month, and then sometimes Mondays of the alternating months. And it's a group to basically make it a more or a less hurdled experience, so that there's not so many brick walls or boomerang experiences for those that are looking for housing and being on the access list. And we have had speakers that go through the checklist of questions that the people have to go through when they're first going through the preliminary questions to get on the voucher list. But every month we have a guest speaker, and it just is a planning meeting to make it a smoother experience for those on the waiting list. Advocacy Academy with Cal Voices is a great place for people trying to learn how to advocate for themselves and the mental services that are lacking within the community. Then there's anonymous programs. I'm sure everybody's familiar with all the A programs, Alcoholics Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous, but there's also codependent programs called Nar-Anon for narcotics families and friend members, and Al-Anon for alcoholic friends and family members. So those are going on live and strong in San Mateo County. And then just recently I heard, I can't pronounce his name. Is it Chan Zuckerberg? Dan Zuckerberg. He was opening a creative arts center in Redwood City, which should have creative arts classes and recreational classes like yoga and stuff in the downtown area. And if that's not enough, Star Vista also offers reunification counseling for your clients. Like if they're getting out of jail and want their families to have therapy for their kids and or their partners, they do offer reunification therapy. So yeah, I think that.
Yeah, and then there's the Voices of Recovery event.
Oh yeah, in the month of September. Yeah, that's coming up. For anybody who doesn't know, the big month of September is Recovery Month. And your clients in the courthouse of Redwood City Courthouse Square, where everybody lines up to get on the court docket and through the security line, that whole courtyard area is going to have resource tables in September. That Voices of Recovery will announce the date for that tabling event, and they'll also have resource tables at their picnic in September. But that's a huge opportunity to learn of everything in the county. And we're also hoping to have duplicate tables at the August 31st Overdose Awareness Day in Pacifica, where we'll be doing a memorial walk in Pacifica the last Saturday of August. It'll be the first memorial walk in Pacifica because it's National Overdose Awareness Day to kick off that month of Recovery Month in September.
Those are great.
That's what I know of. If anybody else knows of stuff coming up or going on, because I know this month is Mental Health Awareness Month, please let us know.
Yep. All right. Thanks for those resources. Anything you would add, Rachel, for partnerships?
Carry Narcan.
Yeah.
1 in 4 Americans know somebody who's overdosed. So the odds are you're going to come across somebody who overdoses. Carry and know how to use Narcan.
Yeah.
If you don't know how to use Narcan, that will be a demonstration that we will be doing August 31st too.
Awesome. Cool. All right. Well, let's go to the next slide, please, Sarah. Speaking of, well, this training is actually in June, so it's not technically during Mental Health Awareness Month. But serving clients with complex health needs is going to be on June 5th. It will build on concepts discussed in part 1, Medi-Cal basics, CalAIM, et cetera, and the implementation of best practices. Next slide, please. Conclusion and wrap up. Sarah, I think, is going to put the feedback survey poll in the chat. We would love if you would fill that out. We would love if you would tell us what you learned today that you will use in your work, so we know how to. Oh, sorry, it's a poll that popped up. I didn't. Please answer the poll. I'll give you guys a second to do this. After this training, my understanding of the unique stressors related to custodial trauma can be rated as, and then supporting folks and overall rating. And if you want to share in chat, if there's anything you'll use, so we know what to focus on the next time, that would be great. We're at 44% participation, so I am going to hope that we can get like 2 to 3 more people to do the poll before we close it.
Guys, we need these ratings, man.
While you are doing that, this QR code that is in this slide here, which you all will get the slide deck, I believe, afterward, is for the CLSI quarterly newsletter. Like we said, we create new resources and send them out in our very low traffic newsletter. So we encourage you to sign up for that. If you ever have a question related to the criminal legal system, that's our team email. So there's like 5 or 6 of us that get that, and we'll try to get back with you. We put all of our resources on our website. So there's lots of stuff up there, just really quick briefings, like 3 to 5 pages, answering some questions that we get a lot for CLSI. And we have 68% participation. Thanks y'all for participating in the poll. That's great. And that's it. So we have 5 minutes. Rachel and Ivy and Sarah and I can hang out. But otherwise, thank you for your time this afternoon. I know it was kind of a heavy subject. We hope you learned some stuff or it was helpful to you. And enjoy the rest of your week.
Spay and neuter your pets now. And that what Bob Barker used to say at the end of the show.
Oh, did he? It's true. This is not an animal training, but that is true.
I'll just tell you how dirty the gel cells are in there if nobody has questions, just for shits and giggles. I would go in there and clean them with the milk paper school blue and white crates. I would actually pour the water along the wall and then flush the water underneath the gel cell with my sandals. And they said I was flooding the cells, but I said I was the lifeguard, so I knew what I was doing. It was completely under control, and I was flushing it during out their hallway. So it was something for them to do on their work shift. And they actually ended up writing me up, so I didn't get out of my 24-hour lockdown for 4 or 5 days after I had done it from the top floor of the ADSEG. But that was one of my comical ways of dealing with lockdown.
Use what strategies you can.
Yeah, I had to sing TLC's Waterfall song while I did that, of course. But thanks you guys for being part of the training. Whoever's still on.
Yeah, we have 17 people still on. So we're just hanging out, y'all. You're getting a lot of thank yous. Thanks for talking.
Like us. You really, really like us.
Well, I hope you all do something nice for yourselves today. It was a lot to talk about.
Yeah, it didn't get too ugly though. Like when I do CIT, it gets for me, sometimes it is really dramatic. Standing in like a room of like 40 or 50 officers telling my story, that always makes me nervous. But regular people don't make me nervous.
Well,
was there a question? No, it's just
more thank you.